I mean, one of the definitions is which ever since I got to know or introduced to the capability approach, I'm a member of Human Development and Capability Association. Since then, actually my thinking is that development, I am very much impressed with Amartya Sen's concept of development as freedom. So I understand development as freedom in a very, very simplest way to tell is development should be able to give us freedom and choices. Development should be able to give us more choices. So more choices means what kind of choices? Choices are not between buying a Maruti, or Alto. Choices are not between buying an Alto car or Skoda. Those are not these choices, because those choices only very few people, 1% of the people only can have. People like us and those who are still in the low income group, the choices are going to bed, having food, and going to bed without having food. Going to school and being able to get educated, not being able to go to school and being educated. And being able to eat 3 times good meals, whatever you want to eat, and not being able to do that. These are the choices. So development should be able to give choices. Amartya Sen very nicely he tells about, like, if somebody is fasting, for whatever is the reason, if somebody is fasting, that person is hungry because he choose to eat, he choose not to eat rather than eating. Because he has food, he or she has food is available, but choose not to eat. So that is not an issue, because you have the alternative, you have the choice of eating or not eating. But for poor people, they don't have this. They are hungry because they don't have the choice of accessing the food. So those are the basic choices, and development should be able to give that kind of choices. For girls, actually, girls want to get into job. They want to get into job, but they are not able to get because they don't have choice, because the supporting services are not there. From the government, there are no supporting services for the girls to get into jobs, when they have children to take care and their families to take care, and the support is very, very low. So these are some of the general thoughts. Okay, so development can be seen as a process of expanding real freedom that people enjoy, focusing on human freedoms contrast with the narrow views of development, such as identifying development with the growth of national product or with rise in personal incomes. So this is the contribution of Amartya Sen for development. So now this is if we are looking at development as freedom, so how gender comes in this? So what kind of freedoms people, women have, and why it is important to integrate gender in the development process. So why gender is a development issue? Because first itself, I told you that I entered into the working on gender issues because it is a development issue. Why gender is a development issue? Because development aims to change people's lives individually and collectively. So economic development, even if you define in narrow sense or broader sense, economic development, it aims to change people's lives, change for better. People should have more income, more choices. And these changes are, they happen individually and also collectively. There are collective choices. See, for example, improve me using a road. So using a public road, transportation or a road, so it is a collective thing. It's a public good. So improving those accesses. So those are the things that development aims at it. So establishes social structures or institutions have gendered dimensions which will influence the process and impact of development. So we have institutions. See, when I'm talking about the institution is not just only walls and buildings. Institutions are the customs, traditions, or practices. They are also institutions. And the governance is an institution. So these are the institutions. So what I'm stressing or giving importance to is these institutions, they have gendered dimensions. So since morning, in morning lecture, I have told you what is gender dimension and what is gender, why it is a social construct. So in that sense, these institutions have gendered dimensions. So these gender dimensions, for example, one institution I can tell you, family as an institution. So in our system, family as an institution, we expect girls to be in the household. We expect girls to be taking care of the family. So if a man gets job anywhere, he can go. Whereas a girl, if she gets around their family only, she can take the job. Otherwise, she can't take the job. So that her choice of taking the job and not taking the job is coming from the dimension of, from the gendered dimension of women are responsible for the family. Women are responsible for taking care of the family. That is a gendered dimension. Man also can do, but our gendered, our social norm is that it is the responsibility of the female to take care of the food and other requirements within the family. So that gender norm, it has the gender dimension. In this dimension, females are responsible, whereas men are responsible for earning outside. So this dimension or this gender dimension, it influences her choices. So it influences the processes. In the sense, what is the process here? The process of her joining the labor market, in a broader sense, we'll take it, not at an individual level. So here, when we are looking at the macro level, at a broader level, the process is the process of her joining the labor market, not being able to join the labor market. So here, this process, this gendered process, it is a gendered process. Why it is a gendered process is, her able to enter and not able to enter is depending on the gender norms. So this entering or not entering is a process. This will have an impact on development, because I am coming to show you why gender equality is important for sustainable development. How development and gender equality are interrelated, I am going to talk about it. So here, this particular particular context, what we are understanding is that the established social structures and institutions, they have gendered dimension. These gender dimensions will influence the processes, and these processes will have an impact on the development. So what are the institutions? The social institutions are family as a basic unit, and the traditional authority in lineage. Somebody wants fan. Yeah. So traditional authority and institutions of modern governance, that is district parliament, and they are all governance structures, and economic structures, that is labor organizations and employment pattern, formal, informal, all these are the institutions. So these institutions, they are gendered. Examples of gendered aspects of individual and social life. See, for example, how they are gendered. For example, work means work only. But whereas for females, work, we have productive work and reproductive work. So productive work is earning outside, and reproductive work is taking care of the house. I clarified about what is productive work and unproductive work, reproductive work. So this year, productive work and reproductive work are gendered. So this clear dimension that females, more time of females is spent in reproductive work and less time is in productive work. And access to land and use of social services. So this is also gendered. In many communities, there is no access for girls to the family property and also some social services. And access to and use of power. So in many families and many households and many communities, women have less access to and use of power, in the sense, decision making. Decision making is also gendered. And livelihoods. Livelihoods is different access to resources such as money and land. So here also, apparently it may be every freedom people say. But when it comes to exercising the freedom, the gender norms come in, because the responsibility of the female is within the household. So these are the institutions that will have an impact on the processes. When the processes are affected, they will have an impact on the development. And growth and development. The relationship with growth and development equality is largely due to three factors. What is the relation between economic growth and gender equality is, one thing is gender differences in access to assets limit women's options. As I told you, because of the gender norms, access to assets. So access to resources. Resources is not just only money alone. Access to knowledge, access to education, access to health services. So they are all gendered. So there are limitations. They limit women's options. So women have very little options, very little option to exercise here. Then gender differences in labor remuneration lead to conflict in household and affect labor allocation at the domestic level. So this is also another thing which will affect the growth. Then gender difference in labor and other factors of production limit economic efficiency and output. That also I have explained to you how gender differences will lead to suboptimal allocation of suboptimal efficient allocation of resources, leading to wastage of resources. So that is why gender equality is very, very important for economic. So what are the different approaches? The different approaches they are developed over a period of time. So one is women in development approach, and second one is women and development approach, and gender and development approach. So since 1930s, this thinking and contributions and there is a paradigm shift actually. Now we are in gender and development approach framework. So let us see how this thing has evolved over a period of time. So historically theorizing about women and development, historically 1930s, history of women, gender and development theory is interwoven with the history of policy interventions. So means, in early 30s, development initiatives which had begun to colonial period, so they largely ignored women. They never bothered about when colonial regime was going on. India was also under British rule. So when that was going on, there was no mention about women in development or gender in development. Nobody bothered about whether women are also involved or not. So nobody bothered about it. Why? Because these approaches identified development with modernization, assumed the whole adoption of Western technology institutions. So in the modern paradigm, what has happened is people in the modernization theory promote more modernization, industrialization, and mechanization. So it was not, nobody thought about, when mechanization takes place, what happens to jobs and whether it helps men and women equally or not. Such thinking was not at all there. It was just only modernization and mechanization. So 1940s and 50s, development planners designed projects aimed to modernize colonies all over the world. So when colonial rule was swept away by decolonization with India in the late 40s, newly independent governments hired many of these former colonial development experts to fulfill the electoral promises. So means, more industrialization, when we got our independence and the planning era started, so there was not really much about. Only mention was that because of feminist activists, some government schools were started for girls, and only that kind of interventions have taken place. So formulation of modernization paradigm coincided, of course, with the hegemony of US. So in 70s, what happened is by Esther Bostrup, she has taken a study of women's role in economic development. She did a lot of field work, and she found that till then nobody questioned whether the newly developed economic resources, whether they are distributed between men and women equally or not, nobody bothered it. But what during 70s, what Bostrup is investigated is, she found out that most of these development programs, most of the development projects which were introduced after getting after getting independence, many of these countries, not only in India, several of the developing countries, what she found is that most of these projects ignore women. And many technologically sophisticated projects undermined women's economic opportunities and autonomy. So these projects did not include any gender sense. They are not at all gender sensitive. They did not look at where women are located, what do they do, what kind of skills they have, what support they need, whether they have practical needs, strategic needs. Nobody bothered about these things. So that Bostrup has found out. So Bostrup in her field work, after her field work, and based on her field work, she found out that the development completely neglects women. Development is gender biased. Development gave opportunities only for men. So, and because government interventions helped only men, they have completely neglected. They did not look at the women's opportunities. So that was the finding, Bostrup. And Bostrup is a seminal study. She has found out that, development projects completely neglect women. So Bostrom study seriously challenged the argument that benefits from development would automatically trickle down. We have our trickle down theory. So she has challenged the trickle down theory. She found out that, the development completely neglects women, and unless until we take care, these projects do not lead to equal opportunities for men and women. So women challenged the assumption that modernization would automatically increase gender equality. So then they began to use what is called women in development. So then they started influencing the government. United States Agency for International Development was also started. And these policymakers, these researchers, and after Bostrop's study, the policymakers and activists, they seriously started questioning governments for implementation of this kind of program. I mean, programs which sideline women. So then they wanted more. They started using what is called women in development. They started using the concept of women in development. So USAID established Women in Development Office to ensure that women participate fully and benefit equally from US overseas development assistance. So Percy amendment was also made. What this Percy amendment said is that, all development programs, when they are evaluated, they should see whether women also got benefited or not. That was it. So WID perspective has enhanced our understanding. And when WID perspective came, when women in development perspective came, people started looking at databases. Because till then, nobody bothered about how many women benefited, where women are located, how many got educated, how many are skills. There was nothing like that. So after WID, people started looking at developing databases, and it has given a warning that, unless until we have databases, we can't make gender sensitive policies. So this is all policy related. So then countries started developing statistical measures to understand women are located. So with the approach, with its determination to integrate women into development, slowly became the concept of many governments. Many governments and also donor agencies, they have started using the concept of women in development and trying to see how to integrate women in the development process. Then WID approach tended to preoccupy itself with women's roles. So WID approach generally, but after a few more years, people, the policymakers and researchers and feminist activists, they started questioning the WID approach, because the WID approach generally ignored the impact of global inequalities on women in the third world and the importance of race and class in women's lives. Because women, you may say that all are women, but there is no homogeneity. Each group of women are different: educated women, uneducated women, rural and urban, this caste and that caste, and race. So there are so many differences. What they found is, WID approach actually ignored these kind of diversity in women and their diversified requirements. So that is how actually people started criticizing WID approach. And then it gave birth to what is called the women and development approach. So next came the women and development approach. So what the WID criticism, those criticized WID. So the radical feminist critic of liberal and Marxist feminism argued that patriarchy exists in all societies. It is a fundamental source of inequality. See, Marxist feminists and liberal Marxists, what they argue is that patriarchy is the main thing. Patriarchy is the main reason for suppression of women. So if we integrate women in development approach, but still it will be working in the patriarchal society. So when there is a patriarchal society, integration of women in the development projects, it won't help. So they still work in the patriarchal world only. So that is why what they argued is that women only projects. So what they proposed is women in development projects, they are not helping women. So you create women only projects. So women only projects means some projects exclusively for women, rather than having some women component. Actually, all these things have taken place. All these, frameworks are used our Indian development also. Indian planning also. When women development programs are introduced, all these things have happened in our. I have a paper about all these things. Maybe if it is necessary, I can give a link to that. So then women only project, they are asked for what is called the women-only projects. So women-only projects carefully constructed to protect women's interests from patriarchal domination. See, because of the patriarchal domination, subordination is taking place. So if you put women in development in the same framework, it is not going to help. Men are going to dominate. You should have women-only projects. So women and development paradigms test the distinctiveness of women's knowledge, women's work, and women's goals and responsibilities. What WID paradigm says is that you should have programs based on their capabilities, based on the distinctive knowledge. Women have certain distinctive knowledge. So, and their aspirations, their goals, you should prepare separate, exclusively women-only programs. It argues for recognition of this distinctness. So it is important to identify the distinctiveness, special characteristics, and make the programs and acknowledge the special role that women can play. So develop the program. That is the WAD approach. But WAD approach also has been criticized by several in later years. I'm not going very, very deep. There is one very useful this one online resource. Both I'm sharing in this. You can go through that. So this GAD approach, this is gender and development. So GAD approach emerged in 1980s as an alternate to WID and WAD. This is also known as empowerment approach or gender aware planning. See, what this GAD approach says is basically the bottom line or the crux of GAD approach is that when you are addressing women's issues, it should not be just segregated. Women only programs, men only programs, it should not be segregated like that. What it says is involvement of men and women. So involvement of men also in promoting the gender equality. So that is why they call it as gender and development. So gender and development means, for example, one example for this kind of thing is paternity leave. So many governments, Western world already it is there. In India also, this paternity leave is introduced, that man also gets so many days of leave for taking care of the newly born baby. So what it means is men also have a role, because biologically only female can produce baby, but taking care of can also be shared by men. So that is how actually we have got what is called the paternity leave has been introduced in the framework of development. Men also have a role. It is not in this reproductive role taken care of. So that is how actually this GAD approach stresses that it is important to involve men also in this. So GAD recognizes the differential impact of development policies and practices on men and women, and sees women as agents, not as simple recipients of development. This calls for to question both gender relations and development process. So what GAD approach says is, you look at the gender relations. So what does meant by gender relations? I have already in the concepts I have explained. So gender relations, how men and women interact. So where there is conflict, where there is more domination of men, or where there is more domination of women. Gender, we are talking about men and women. So what GAD approach says is, you identify these things, identify the gender relations, then based on that you prepare your policies and programs. So within the GAD perspective, a distinction is drawn between women's interests and gendered interests. See, in GAD approach, they clearly spoke about what is called the women's interests. Women's interests are biological category. So women's interests are, they are biological. Because they are biological, they are homogeneity. So because childbirth is same for all females, it is biological. So it is common for all females. But whereas gendered interest is different. So gendered interest is, in some communities, girls are not sent out. In some communities, girls are sent out. It is gender norm. So sending out a girl for an employment, or particularly for employment or further studies, it is a social construct. In some communities, they are allowed to go. In some communities, they are not allowed to go. That means for the same females, it is something in some communities, in another thing in another community. So that means it is different. It is different. Gendered interests are different, whereas biological interests are different. So that is why GAD, they look into the women's interests and gender interests. So both are to be taken care. That is the crux of gender and development. So in policies, what happens is, how policies work. Because we are economic students, we should look at policies. Policies, it's not that always policies affect women only negatively. So policies also affect men also, sometimes biased against men. So our responsibility is to see that how these policies are affecting men and women as a policy analysis, in policy analysis. So how these policies work is, policies work as grease between the cycles. So I really like this diagram. It is some UNDP report. So gender outcomes result from interaction between households and markets. See, gender equality comes about not by itself. And all these institutions, they interact with each other. See, women household decisions, they will be affecting her participation in labor market or not. So her participation and not participation in labor market will affect her economic opportunities, and it will affect the gender equality. See, but these policies, no, policies work as a lubricant between these. They will be helping. Some policies will be helping, some policies will be negatively affecting. So as a policy analyst, we should understand, we should analyze what kind of policies are affecting positively and what kind of policies are affecting negatively, where they are affecting, whether they are affecting informal institutions, they are affecting markets or formal institutions or households. And because of this, what is happening? In economic opportunities, what is happening? Exercising agency, taking decisions, whether that is happening, or endowments, inequality in endowments, resource endowments. So where it is happening, it is important to look at. So this diagram clearly shows the importance of policies. So policies play a very important role. So Naila Kabir has developed this. Naila Kabir is one of the feminist economists, and she is right now in London School of Economics. So Kabir's framework is like, she is from Bangladesh, and this framework is, there are policies. Policies are gender blind policies. Policies are gender blind policies means policies that ignore the socially determined rules. I think by now, all of you know what, when I'm talking about gender, it is about social construct. So these gender blind policies means the policies don't look at how the society restricts men and women and all that. So they just simply make policies, they are gender blind policies. But rethinking assumption and practices, it will lead to, when you rethink about these things, it will lead to what is called the gender sensitive practices. So these gender sensitive practices and policies, it will lead to gender neutral policies, gender specific policies, or gender redistributive policies. Policies are not always only gender neutral policies. Policies could be gender specific policies or gender redistributive policies. All these three come under what is called the gender sensitive policies. So in gender sensitive policies, gender neutral means it won't cause any extra burden on women. So they are the gender neutral policies. It doesn't cause extra burden. If at all it is causing burden, it causes burden to both men and women equally. So they are gender neutral policies. But gender specific policies, some policies are there which are specific to women, and for example, reservation policy. So women reservation policy, it's a gender specific policy. And because they target women to reach a particular level. In Panchayat Raj institutions, there are very few women. So women are given positive discrimination. It is called positive discrimination. So they are given reservation. So they catch up with men. They are the gender specific policies. And gender redistributive policies. There are some policies which intend to transform the existing distribution of resources. See, for example, I think Karnataka government also, if house or any property is registered in the name of females, there is some rebate on registration charges. So why it is introduced is so that property will be registered in the name of females. So that is how actually some distribution of this thing takes place. And similarly, another policy is like girls also have equal right over the property of the parents, in the sense that property is to be equally distributed or distributed to girls also. So it means girls also have right over the parental property. So that also there is a law. If girls can go to court if they are not. So that also came about. So that also questions the unequal distribution of resources. Earlier, only boys were getting inheritance, but now girls also have equal inheritance law. So that means it redistributes the resources. It gives opportunity for redistribution, because earlier distribution was based on only gendered, but whereas this redistribution gives opportunity for girls also to access the resources. These are the three kinds of policies. So OECD came about with, because, as you see, these institutions, I spoke about family, household, and governance, and these are some of the institutions. So these institutions, as I told you, they influence the processes. And they influence the processes, and processes will influence the access, and that will influence the development. So based on this argument, OECD, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, they came out with indices. Index has been developed. So that tool actually, 162 countries, they have developed these 50 indicators. And I will show you about that in the next slide. So this gives where India stands. And indicators affecting the economic role, of course, all these things are there. So these are the indicators: gender and social development indicators. Social institutions, they have looked at discrimination in the family, restricted physical integrity, and restricted access to productive and financial resources, restricted access to civil liberties. So these are the dimensions, and these are the indicators. Based on indicators, all of you know familiar with Human Development Index and other things. So some methodology they have used, because of time I'm not getting into methodology. So what they have done is based on because all these are social indicators. As I told you, gender is a social construct. So how far these social discrimination is leading to greater gender discrimination, they came out with the gender and institutional development indicators. So this is actually, I have taken only our neighbors. There is no point in what is called comparing India with America or London, because their gender norms are different and our gender norms are different. But whereas in among our neighbors, in the sense like Asian countries, more or less it is the same. Even there also they have what is called the sun preference and such kind of things are there. So this SIGI, Social Institutions and Gender Index, so you can see these countries are ranked in, countries are grouped into medium discrimination, higher the number, higher the discrimination between men and women. So Sri Lanka and obviously Iran and Afghanistan, there is a lot of discrimination. So their SIGI value is 52, 54. Bangladesh also, Islamic Republic of Iran, it is also very high. So among our neighbors, India is better. Social institutions and gender, this one. But even in India, which is ranking medium in discrimination in the family is high. All other discriminations are low. So here discrimination in the family is 46.9, almost 47%. Whereas restricted physical integrity and restricted access to productive and financial resources, restricted civil liberties, India is ranking well. In the sense, there is less discrimination. And Islamic countries, it is 75%. And in other countries, it is 75%. But still, one important thing that we have to observe is that discrimination in the family is more in India, because that is again based on our gender norms and religion and so many factors. So what are the recent shifts? What has happened in recent times? Here there is a mistake, higher education, I couldn't change this. So what is happening is, here the present situation, what is happening is, let us see that 2015-16, that is the latest data available. It is little old. But there is this trend is continuing. More and more females are coming into higher education. So in PhD, we have, of course, all India level, and more girls are also seen, not so very low, but some numbers are there. So MPhil also you have more females, and post-graduation also you have, in some states, we have more girls than boys. So that means, it is gender parity is somewhat achieved. It's not that earlier it was only 2 numbers and 3 numbers. Now we have gender parity is achieved in higher education as far as MPhil and post-graduation is concerned. But what happens is labor force participation. When labor force participation comes about, see, labor force participation is completely gendered in the sense like, NSS, this is the only data available. So labor force participation 2011-12, male 813, female 358 in rural areas. Urban areas, it is relatively better, but still urban areas also only so many males, 764, it is 205 per thousand. So this is the kind of gender gap that we are observing. And if you look at the employment, this is also NSS data, statewide unemployment rate. This is about unemployment rate per persons aged 15 and status approach. So you will find, the unemployment rate in rural areas, because they follow different methodology. But what is main important thing is work participation rate is very, very low. So why this transition? Why there is difficulty? Because you are finding more and more girls coming to higher education and getting educated, but it is not transforming into the work participation. So, and it is happening not only in India, in several of the countries. And this manifestation now, people are calling it as ideal girls. So all over the world, this ideal girl phenomena is increasing. So more and more girls are coming to higher education, doing their masters and PhD, but later on they are not going. There are several reasons. Some studies have shown that we don't have supporting services and all those things. But somebody has spoken about this. Indian men don't do much housework. That is what is, there is not much of supporting. See, for how many average minutes spent per day on routine household work, men aged 15 and 64. So you see, the India is so very less. And Slovenia, France, Australia, in these countries, this is minutes per day. So 120 minutes, 90 minutes and all that. Whereas when it comes to India, Turkey, Japan, and Portugal is also somewhat okay. But in India, it is less than 30 minutes on routine household work. So this is also one of the reasons. So why gender equality and sustainable development are to be linked? Why gender equality is very important for attaining the sustainable development? And now we know everybody is talking about sustainable development goals and performance of sustainable development goals, attainment of sustainable development goals. So somewhere I was seeing the data, in gender equality, we are lagging in attainment of sustainable development. So first of all, as economic students, we should be able to defend why it is important to have gender equality for sustainable development. So first thing is, of course, it is a moral and ethical imperative that men and women should have equal opportunities. Up to 3:15, I think my class is, yeah. So second is, it is critical to redress the disproportionate impact of economic, social and environmental shocks and stresses. Why we need to have gender equality is, if you have gender equality, the impact of the environmental shocks or economic shocks and all, they will be equally distributed between men and women. And see, for example, COVID also has disproportionate impact on women than men. See, jobs, so many jobs are lost. So most of the job losers are women, because they are not equal, on equal par with within the labor market. So if there is gender equality, these kind of shocks will be equally distributed. And another thing is, it is important to build up women's agency and capabilities to create better synergies between gender equality and sustainable development outcomes. See, several research studies have shown that the gender equality or women's participation will have an impact on several of the dimensions of human development. So that is why it is important to have, for women to have capabilities and exercising their agency. See, there are two things. Since capability approach, what it says is, Having capability is one thing, and exercising that is another thing. You may be capable of doing something, but if you are not given an opportunity, you can't do that. You know that you can do it, but you don't do it because you don't have opportunity. So that is to be promoted. It is important to promote that. So there is a growing evidence of synergies between gender equality on one hand and economic, social, and environmental sustainability. There is so much of research that is taking place in this. So you know that sustainable development, these are the three pillars of sustainable development. You know, sustainable development has got three important dimensions. So one is economic development and environmental responsibility and social progress. So all these are interlinked. Only when all these take place, only sustainable development take place. Because if you look at only economic development and social progress, it may lead to a fair world. Because economic development is there and social progress, equal distribution. So you have a fair world. But you don't know whether it is sustainable or not. And similarly, economic development and environmental responsibility. You know that it will lead to a viable society. It sustains. But you don't know whether equally distributed or not resources. So similarly, social progress and environmental responsibility, it will lead to livable world. But you don't know whether people have enough to eat. So only when economic dimension, social dimension, and environmental dimension are integrated, it will lead to what is called the sustainable development. So this is the sustainable development model. So in this sustainable development, where do women fit? Where women fit into this? So in this, we have seen three pillars: economic, environment, and social. So in this first pillar is economic dimension. So women are essential to poverty reduction. So in economic dimension, first important thing is reduction in poverty. So there are several studies which have clearly shown that women play an important role in poverty reduction. So because SHGs and several interventions are there, many of the studies have shown that, money given to women, major part of it is spent within the household rather than money given to men. So that has been clearly shown. So World Bank publishes regular assessments and newsletters under the banner Gender Equality is as Smart Economics. You should read the World Bank publications. So gender economics is a smart economics. So it is very important to have gender equality so that, whatever money government spends, whatever programs implemented, so they will be effectively utilized. So that is what is smart economics. You spend less and you get more. So that happens if gender equality takes place. So to meet the economic dimension of sustainable development also, gender equality is very, very important. See, United Nations and World Bank studies show that focusing on women in development assistance and poverty reduction strategies leads to faster economic growth than gender neutral approaches. So target women and provide assistance. So that will lead to better economic development than the gender neutral, not for specifically focusing on women. So this is how the gender equality or giving opportunities for women will lead to meet the economic dimension of sustainable development. And next pillar is society, social needs. So social dimension is the social pillar of sustainable development. It emphasizes on equality and involves confronting negative social effects. See, when equality is achieved, as I told you, the shocks will be equally distributed. So in response to global crisis, many countries are implementing strategies for green growth, green economies, and green jobs. So for sustainable development, many countries are implementing what is called green initiatives. But nobody knows whether these green initiatives are affecting men and women equally, or whether women are losing more jobs or men are losing more jobs. So whether these initiatives, whether they are reaching to social equality or not, nobody knows. So similarly, anti-poverty strategies, they need to consider the role of social institutions, cultural limitations. So when these things are to be taken care, the gender equality is important. See, particularly these green initiatives, sometimes these green initiatives may be taking away the opportunities for women. So that way it is important to look at the social initiatives and gender equality. And next, third pillar is environment and gender. So environment or ecosystem goods and services, women are actively involved in what is called conserving environmental resources, and women are the most users. You see, girls and women spend a significant portion of their time performing subsistence tasks linked to natural resources. For example, gathering fuel and growing vegetables and in all these natural resources activities. And also, especially, for example, if you take forest conservation, so joint forest management, and so women are involved in the conservation of these resources. And studies also have shown that wherever women manage the local, when women are given the responsibility of maintaining the social forestry, the outcomes are better. So because their approach at the environment, conservation of environment is different. So due to gender inequalities, environmental changes have different impacts on men and women. So environment, also climate change, and they will be having differential impact. If gender equality, it has to be equally distributed, it is important to have the gender equality. So these are all the three pillars of sustainable development, or they have different dimensions, differential impact on women. At the same time, the processes also will have a differential outcome if women are not involved in the processes. So failure of mainstream approaches. See, our mainstream approaches, our usual what is called market-based instruments, and those mainstream approaches to defining and developing green economies have paid little attention to their differentiated impact. So many gender produces environmental destruction, social exploitation, and inequalities. So what it basically says is that when negotiations take place at the international level, we should not be looking at only the environmental consequences. So when those interventions are made, how they will be affecting the opportunities for men and women. So that needs to be taken care actually some of these writers which I have mentioned here, so they have criticized that these mainstream approaches have actually failed in integrating gender in the environmental protection. So World Survey on the role of women in development 2014. So this survey identified 3 criteria for assessing whether policies and programs and actions implemented in the name of sustainability are likely to achieve gender equality or not. This means, they came out with a criteria to understand if government is implementing a particular policy, a sustainable development policies, whether they are affecting men and women equally or not. So to understand that, they came out with the 3 criteria. 3 criteria to understand any policy when you are looking at whether it is leading to economic gender equality or not, whether it is affecting men and women equally or not. To understand that, they said that you need to have 3 criteria. So what is the first criteria? The first criterion is whether with respect to women's capabilities and their enjoyment of human rights, particularly the capabilities and rights of poorest and most marginalized. So what it says is that any intervention, whether it is sustainable development intervention or any intervention, we should check, we should see whether it is improving the capabilities of women or not, whether it is giving, whether it is negatively affecting the human rights, whether it is creating, whether it is giving opportunity for women to enjoy the life, or it is increasing the drudgery. For example, if you take even now microcredit and self-help groups, there are studies which have pointed out that these interventions, because women are to be very frank, they are very sensitive. So they don't want to be told. So they will pay monthly installment and whatever it is, they sincerely pay. So that, banks find women are very bankable. Why? Because NPS will be less if they give money to lend money to women. So NPS of central groups money is very less. So because of that, women are main target. So they want to lend money to women. But what is happening is there are some studies, Bangladesh also there are some studies. What came out clearly is that this is creating pressure on women because they borrow money and they have to repay the money. And in borrowed money will be given to husband or son for starting their own business or something, but they don't contribute for the repayment. But this female will be responsible for the repayment. So it is creating a lot of pressures on women. So that way it is negatively affecting their way of life. And also there are some in Andhra Pradesh and all, the self-help groups, banks have created a lot of problems, and microfinance institutions also have created a lot of problems. So in the name of creating what is called inclusive society, this has created more pressure to women. And nobody had ever asked, are you interested in taking? You start a Sangha, you form a Sangha, you take the loan and do this. Nobody bothered about what do they want. And so government is giving what it can give rather than what people want. So first criterion, what it says is that you should see whether this intervention is improving the capabilities of women, whether this intervention is improving the rights of marginalized sections of the people, or whether this intervention is this intervention is coming in the way of any human rights. So this is to be assessed before any program is to be implemented. So, and the second criterion is that with respect to impact on unpaid care work of women and girls. So this is also very important. As I told you, women's work is invisible. We call it as invisible. Women's work is invisible because within the household, she spends 7 to 8 hours. When enumerator comes and asks, are you working? I'm not working. So it is not, actually she is working. So women's work is invisible. But what happens is, if any program is being implemented, any project is implemented, first of all, you have to look at whether it is increasing the unpaid care work or reducing the unpaid care work. Because unpaid care work, if it increases, if the burden increases, it will have an impact on women. So I can give you one example of government reduced public expenditure on health services. When government, social services only government reduces. Most of the time on social sector only government cuts the public expenditure. So when government cuts public expenditure on health and education services, especially health services, women's work within the household increases. So because they are responsible for taking care of the sick and elderly people. So if any such policy, and because of that, what happens is women more time they'll be spending within the household, it increases their unpaid work. So it is an extra burden for women. So that policy is not actually a sustainable policy. If a policy is to be sustainable, it has to take care of how much it is increasing the unpaid work of females. And this unpaid work and paid work is more important in the case of marginalized and poor households. Those who can't afford hospitalization, those who can't afford nurse services. So for them, the unpaid work increases. So it is important to look at whether the government intervention policy or program, whether it has any impact on the unpaid work or increases the unpaid work. And the third criterion is, it is about, third criterion relates to the fully equal and meaningful participation of women in sustainable development as actors, leaders, and decision makers. So any government intervention to see whether it is leading to sustainable development or not, it is important to see women are also part of that. They participate in the decision making. If some committee is formed, there should be women representation. If some decision-making body is made, so there should be women representation. So when such women are part of the decision-making process, whether that is there or not, if there is more opportunity for women to participate in the decision-making, so we can say that such policies will lead to sustainable development. So what the third criterion says is how much the policy is inclusive, how much the policy is creating opportunity for women to participate in the decision making. So these three criteria are important. These criteria should be taken to assess if any development intervention is leading to sustainable development or not. So, but how to achieve this? Yes, it is fine. Okay. We have been arguing that it is important to have gender equality and equal opportunity, and it is important for sustainable development, all that we have spoken. But how to achieve this? Is it possible to achieve this? It is possible to achieve this by involving those whose lives well-beings are taken care through community groups and appropriate forms of. My first thing is how to achieve this is that, it is important to involve women in decision-making bodies. Like Panchayat now we have, to some extent we have, but other farms also. So many a time we see some committees will be formed, there won't be any women at all. Absolutely no women. And the second one is appropriate forms of investment in public services. This is very important for us as economic students. We should look at what is called the where the investments are going. So now we have what is called the gender budgeting document. So gender budgeting document clearly shows that how much money is spent on women alone programs and how much money is, you can also look at Fiscal Policy Institute, FPI, they in their website, gender budget document, they are releasing every year. So in gender budget document, it clearly talks about how much, where the investments are going. So how much money is spent on what and where the cuts. Because this year, whatever is proposed, it's not that everything is sanctioned. So whatever is proposed and whatever is sanctioned, where the cuts are. Compared to last year, what has been cut, why it has been cut, and where the money is spent, gender audits. So they are very, very important. Public investment and public services. Investments, the form of investments, appropriate forms of investment and public services. So investments have to be clearly, investments in the sense, nothing but government expenditure. So government should identify where the, based on the gender needs, investment should be taking place. Actually, quite long ago, we did one project with the Singama Srinivasan Foundation, which is in Bangalore. What they have done is they have a project, Mysore City Corporation also, I was involved in that. So they were trying to sensitize elected women representatives in making a budget. When budgets are made, how they have to analyze the budget and how they have to represent the women sensitive expenditure. So then that time we did consultative meetings in different wards. So men wards and women wards, and we asked them to prioritize. So where the money should be spent. So there is a difference between the men's priorities and women's priorities. So women have specifically looked into the safety of children, which was never, like for example, one place they wanted a what is called speed breaker. So that was never discussed by men at all. So no, because they're complementary. Certain things you may observe, certain things the others may observe. So that is why it is important to get the women's perspective also when policies are made. So for appropriate investments. And next one is states play a central role in delivering commitments to gender equality. So government plays a very important role for resource use, providing public services, and as I told, so supporting services are very much lacking for girls to come into the employment in India. So then these are the things. And what are the three types of strategies that can be adopted? One is, there are three types of strategies, gender equality strategies. One is tinkering and tailoring and transforming. So tinkering refers to measures aimed at establishing formal equality between men and women, give equal opportunity through equal treatment of legislation mechanisms, ensure law enforcement. Means, existing laws only you tinker, you change it little bit. That is the thing. But a tailoring is specifically tailor-made for this, equal treatment does not automatically lead to equal outcome. So specific measures, specific policies are to be made. That is the tailoring, tailor-made policies for women. Then third one is transforming. It is much beyond that, and it is a permanent thing. It's not an easy thing. Just simply like that, I can tell transform the minds. It is not that. For ages, it has not taken place. It may take several ages for the things to change, to come out of the patriarchal norms. But what it says is transforming, it goes further step by questioning the status quo. And gender mainstreaming would result in adding this potential. So transforming takes place through gender mainstreaming. See, when it is insisted that there should be certainly female representation in particular body, so if it is given in the formation itself, so that some more women will participate in due course, it will lead to greater transformation. So these are the transformation. Transforming is another type of policies. So where does India stand in a global gender gap? So because if some people tell that India is not like what it was, so many girls are coming and they are working here and there. So a lot of girls, and they are becoming too arrogant. They question, divorce rates are increasing. All that thing goes, it all individual experiences. But where do we stand in terms of gender equality? This is World Economic Forum. They release the gender gap report. So World Economic Forum Global Gender Gap Index, 2006 scores and 2020 scores. And we were in 98th position. We have come down to 112. So that is the status. And economic participation, we were in 110 and we came down to 149 position. And educational attainment, we have improved. And health and survival, we have gone down. And political empowerment, we are in very good position. I'll explain to you why it is. Political empowerment, we are doing well. Why? Because we have reservation. Because all these are based on indicators. We have certain indicators, big exercise. I'm not getting into that, but basically it is political empowerment. We are doing well. We are in 18th position. In the global 112 countries, we are in 18th position in political empowerment. Why? Because we have greater participation of women, 50% Gram Panchayat level, and we have more women in governance. So that is why, that is due to the reservation system. So we are in this position. Whereas health and survival, we are in very bad shape. In health and survival, we are in 103, and it has come down to 150. This one, sorry, we are in total 153 countries. Total countries are 153. India is in 112 position now. Earlier it was, India was in 98 position. It has come down to 112 position. So, and health and survival, we have come down 103 position to 158 position. And educational attainment, we have improved 102 to, and this is very, very clear from what I have told about ideal girls phenomena. So ideal girls phenomena, education attainment, we are doing well. In education attainment, at least reasonably better. But whereas it has improved actually education attainment. But whereas economic participation and opportunity, we have come down 110 to 149. This economic opportunity and participation is based on the indicators that how many are in working, how many are working, and what are the supporting facilities available for women, like maternity leave and such kind of thing. Those are the indicators that are that have gone into the economic participation and opportunity. So in those means, this actually represents the state failure of the government. See, opportunities are not created, supporting services are not created. So because of that, we were in 110 position, we have gone down to 149 position. This also will show, like, how there is a decline in work participation rate. They are going together. And yeah, sorry, there is one details here. In economic participation, we have labor force participation rate, wage equality of similar work, estimated earned income, legislators and senior officials, professionals. Those are the indicators of economic opportunity. educational attainment, literacy, and enrollment, all those things, and health and survival, sex rate ratio at birth and health life expectancy years. Whereas in political empowerment, women in parliament, women in ministerial positions, women as adults. So these are the indicators. So that is where India stands in 112th rank out of the 153 countries. So I think these are some of the references and this theoretical perspective on gender and development. This book is very good, and if you want, you can. It can be downloaded. It is downloadable. It gives good understanding of this, and this Institute for New Economic Thinking also gives you very good insight into gender and development. I think with this I will stop because I want to spend some time with you. I want you to speak. Plus, we also have class. Next, one more class is there, I think. So that's why I want to maintain time. Now, floor is yours. I'm here to listen to you. Yeah, please. If there is anything to tell me. Yeah. Nobody is speaking.
Madam, namaste. You have made a good presentation, but you have said so many things regarding gender equality. Are you satisfied with the situation, madam?
No, not at all. No. No, the situation is not